Good afternoon and welcome. My name is Diane Douglas. I'm the Executive Director of Seattle City Club, and it's really terrific to see all of you come out today to hear an important debate for a very important race. For those of you who are new to Seattle City Club, we are a trusted place for civic conversation, inspiration, and action. Our programs strengthen the civic health of the region, and we thank you for joining us. I want to remind you to silence your electronic devices. We're here at Microsoft and probably have 2 or 3 or 4 electronic devices, so silence them in the sense of audible, but that doesn't mean we don't want you to use them. So we do invite you to use social media during and after the debate. If you are following the tweets in the room, Seattle City Club is tweeting today's event with the hashtag 45th debate. We have many partners to produce this debate, and I'd like to thank all of them and invite you to thank them with me when I'm done. The first one is our partner, Cairo 7, which is live streaming this debate, so you'll be able to see it and then tell your friends about it, and they can go and watch it if they couldn't be here with us today. I'd also like to thank our sponsors, for whom none of our programs would be possible without them. The Boeing Company, Microsoft, and Puget Sound Energy. Please join me in thanking all of them. And now I'd like to review the rules of today's program. The response time for each question will be 1 minute per candidate, unless otherwise stated by our moderators. There are no formal rebuttals, but candidates may take some of their allotted time for rebuttals as they choose. Candidates will refrain from asking each other questions, but each candidate has one blue challenge card to be used during the debate. The candidate who uses the card has 45 seconds to make a challenge, and then her opponent has 45 seconds to respond to the challenge. We also invite your questions, and many of you, and that's great, have given us questions from the slips of paper at each of your seats, so fill them out at various times during the program. Our moderators will announce. Staff members from City Club will walk up and down the aisle, so pass them to the ends of your rows and we'll be able to pick them up. And finally, we ask you to please hold all applause and any other audible commentary until the end of the program. Anyone who shouts out or talks or disrupts will be asked to leave and escorted out. And now it is a great pleasure to introduce our moderators for today's debate, Cairo 7's Essex Porter and multimedia journalist Joni Balter. Thanks so much.
Thank you, everyone. Welcome. Let me start with just an introduction of our candidates. Jinyoung Englund is a graduate of the UW who has served as a congressional aide to Washington Representative Kathy McMorris Rogers. She has also served with an educational nonprofit in Mozambique. She currently has her own consulting firm. She's a consultant to executives in public and private businesses, and she lives in Woodward. Manka Dhingra is a graduate of the UW School of Law and a senior deputy prosecutor with the King County Prosecutor's Office. As part of her work, she supervises the Regional Mental Health Court and trains law enforcement officers in crisis intervention, and she lives in Redmond. Welcome, candidates.
How are you? We have asked the candidates today not to give an opening statement. We're looking for something more specific than those kinds of opening statements usually turn out to be. So the first question, and you each have 2 minutes on this, not on the others. What one life experience can you cite that makes you the right person to represent this very sophisticated legislative district? And so all of you know that before we began taping today, we tossed a coin. And so the first candidate to answer this would be Ms. Dhingra, followed by Ms. Englund. Please proceed.
Well, thank you. Thank you to both of you for moderating, and thank you to City Club for hosting this, and thank you to all of you for coming out here and spending your lunch hour listening to us. The one event, I would say that's me getting involved in our crisis intervention training for law enforcement. Over a decade ago, we started having a conversation in King County about alternatives to incarceration, about de-escalation techniques, And setting up our crisis intervention program is definitely something that gives me a lot of expertise to do this job. And that is because we had to get a lot of different stakeholders together to develop this new program, which really changes cultures. So making sure we had prosecutors on board, defense attorneys on board, law enforcement on board, community mental health on board, our jails on board, Western State Hospital, DSHS, and really making sure that we're all working together in developing a program that's new and that's different. And so we actually in King County are at the forefront of doing crisis intervention training in law enforcement in the country. And so I am very proud of that work. More so because we're able to change the way we do things. That we were able to get people together who many times don't work well together and get them to agree on something and then make sure that we're continuing to improve it and continue to make sure it is doing what it's supposed to be doing. So one of the things that we did is we changed the definition of law enforcement. We do not hire warriors anymore. We hire guardians. And that's how we make change, and this is how we actually take care of the people in the state of Washington. So thank you.
Ms. Englund.
I'd say for me, for the last 2 years, I've had the honor of leading an in-house app development team for the Marine Corps. I come from a military family, and my husband's currently a Marine Corps deployed in Asia. And through this process, I had a commanding officer come to me and say, "We have a problem, can you help us solve it?" I presented an idea, and much to my surprise, instead of being shut down by the bureaucratic process, she said, "You know what, we can do this." And we did. It took us 2 years, but we got the buy-in of commanding generals, we got the buy-in of federal civilian employees, we got the buy-in of Marines and their families. We built an award-winning app for the Marine Corps to modernize the way in which the bureaucracy communicates with our men and women on the ground. And I'm proud of that because, in Washington State, we are known to be creative and innovative. We also know that government can be extremely slow and at times very frustrating. And my experience, whether it's the Marine Corps or running a water well drilling project in Africa after graduating from UW, or having experienced Congress from a front row seat, I know that government can be and do better if we bring people across all different industries, from the business, from labor, employees, our teachers, our parents, if we bring people together. And my goal is to treat the 45th district, the people in the 45th, as a brain trust that I will reach out to, if elected, to bring the best ideas to the table from all different kinds of people. Because I think that's how we achieve outcomes. And that's how we make forward positive progress, not just for the district, but for the whole state. Thank you.
Ms. Englund, the first question goes to you. And I ask really in light of the Las Vegas massacre and the fact that gun control has come to the fore as one of the important issues. Yeah. Is there any gun control legislation that you would sponsor next year if elected? And as a practical matter, wouldn't a Democratic majority in the Senate make it more likely for gun control legislation to pass?
So I think we're all shaken up by what happened this week. As someone who, during my lifetime, Columbine, Sandy Hook, and now this, I think we all agree that technology in the marketplace has far advanced what legislators understand to be available in the market. I am against the sale of bug stocks. I don't think any human being should have the ability to be able to turn any weapon into an automatic weapon. I am for enhanced background checks. I think that people in our society who have mental illness or have a criminal background should be thoroughly investigated before they're allowed access. I think it's a false assumption that Senate Democrats would be more successful in passing legislation such as this. As a Republican, I know that those are issues that I want to work across the aisle because this is not a partisan issue. Violence is not a partisan issue. It is something that we, Republicans and Democrats, should be able to work together, and we as a people should demand that we work together to protect people.
But quickly, as a practical matter, you see what happens in our legislature, wouldn't a Democratic majority in the Senate make it easier for gun control legislation to pass?
I don't believe so because, in Washington State, just last year, an initiative for gun control laws and background checks did pass by the people, correct?
Yes.
Yes. And that's something that I support. And I think, again, not all Republicans are the same. Also, not all Democrats are the same.
Okay, we'll leave it there.
Yeah.
We'll leave it there. And for you, Ms. Dhingra, what gun safety legislation would you sponsor next year? And why should voters trust Democrats to pass it? Because sometimes gun control legislation can't even get a vote in the democratically controlled House.
Excellent question. I actually held a press conference earlier this week committing myself to sponsoring 3 very specific gun control legislation. I am committed to doing that because gun violence is preventable. The people in this state have taken leadership on this issue by passing the Extreme Risk Protection Act last year, as well as passing the Enhanced Background Check Initiative. The problem here is our elected officials now need to stand up and take leadership. The people have already spoken about it. So I'm committed to making sure that we are banning the bump stocks, making sure that individuals who have a history of violence are limited in their access to weapons, and that is people who are convicted of domestic violence offenses and individuals who have been charged with a crime, have been found not competent, and have a history of violence. So making sure it's very specific, tailoring it down to history of violence. And I know that firsthand being a prosecutor and having to deal with a lot of these loopholes.
And quickly, does it matter if it's a Democratic Senate? Sometimes a Democratic House will even vote.
It absolutely makes a difference. We had very sensible measures last year that did not even come out of the Republican-controlled Senate. These were things that no one here would have the ability to comment on, to actually see how the legislators would vote on, because they never saw the light of day. And that's what we're going to change with a Democratic majority in the Senate, actually governing.
So moving right along. Ms. Englund, you recently stated at another debate, and I'll read it back to you, I respectfully disagree that we have a regressive tax system in our state. Now, the IRS defines regressive tax as a tax that takes a larger percentage of income from low-income groups than from high-income groups. In Washington State, low-income residents pay a larger percent of their income in taxes than higher-income residents. Do you stand by your earlier statement?
When it comes to, calling the state income tax a regressive tax, here's the thing. There are other regressive taxes that would be employed if we were to have a Democratic majority in the Senate. That includes a carbon tax that disproportionately hits poor people and actually, frankly, families who are immigrant families. It would also, another tax that disproportionately hits the poor is a tax per mile, because the very people who can't afford to live close to where they work are the ones that live farther away and will be subject to that tax per mile, the tolling on the freeways. When it comes to state income tax, as a state, our job is to balance the desires of the people of our state, and 2-to-1, we voted it down a state income tax, along with balancing economic opportunities for people who are low income and people who have disadvantages. Coming from a family that is also low income who oppose a state income tax, I think that in a state that we promote more economic opportunities for people and educational opportunities is a better path forward.
I guess yes or no there. Do you stand by the earlier statement that we do or don't have a regressive tax system?
I stand by the statement that an income tax is not what the people of Washington State want. And I think that as legislators, it's our job to listen to the people and work within the tax structure that is voter preferred and voter approved.
Ms. Dhingra, you have previously showed support for a capital gains tax, a polluter tax, and closing tax loopholes. You have also not supported an income tax statewide going through the legislature. Is that still your stance, or has that position changed? And given Washington's regressive tax system as defined by the IRS, when do you think lawmakers should take a stand for something like that, for something like an income tax?
Thank you. Yes, we do have one of the most regressive tax structures in the country. That's a fact. The other thing we have to be mindful of is this year, the Republican-controlled Senate imposed the highest property tax increase in recent history. We have to make sure we actually roll that back next year, because it's making so hard for people to live in the 45th district, and that's not okay. And so yes, I am extremely in favor of making sure we are closing a lot of the special interest tax loopholes that currently exist. We have to make sure that we have a system where we do reviews of exemptions that were given 50 years ago, 30 years ago, to make sure that this still makes sense with the priorities we have today as a state. As a state, we have to make sure we are prioritizing people, small businesses, and our children. And that is what our tax structure should be based on. So yes, my number one priority will be to make sure that we are closing the special interest tax loopholes. And if it comes to reduce, thank you.
A quick follow-up though, because I don't think you got to the income tax part of the question. Are you still against an income tax, and if so, why? Just quickly.
So the Supreme Court has ruled that we cannot have a state income tax in the state unless it's voter approved. I am never in favor of doing something for the sole purpose of having it be decided by the Supreme Court. So I think it's up to the people. If people want an income tax, they do an initiative on it. But let's solve real problems with real solutions. And that means taking a look at the options in front of us, which is a closing tax loopholes and taking a look at possible of a capital gains tax if that means reducing the property tax.
We have a challenge here, so you have 45 seconds to make your challenge and then 45 seconds to respond to it.
So the state income tax in our state is something that people do not want. Currently, Seattle City Council is trying to push it through with the intent of circumventing the people through the Supreme Court. And if elected, I would be a deciding vote against the state income tax because what people want is no state income tax. And when I talk to people in my district, people feel overburdened by taxes. And so the priority in our government should be fiscal discipline, exercising fiscal discipline to make sure that people have an awareness of how their tax dollars are being spent before we go to the people and propose new and more taxes like a capital gains income tax or a carbon tax or a B&O tax or a state income tax. And I promise I will be a deciding vote against the state income tax if elected in our state.
You have 45 seconds.
Thank you. So the reality of the situation is we have the McCleary decision where the Supreme Court has told us that we as a state are not funding education. We have the federal courts telling us through True Blood that we're not taking care of our mentally ill individuals. And we have another lawsuit with our foster care system. And you know what they have in common? They impact the most vulnerable in our state, our children, the mentally ill, and the foster care system. That is not who we are as a state. We have to take care of people, and that means investing in people. And let me tell you, when you talk about accountability, where you get the most bang for your buck, you do early intervention, you invest in our youth, and that return on that investment will pay for itself.
You turn down the clapping just for the rules here, that would be awesome.
Ms. Dhingra, let me ask you more about the property tax, which you've noted is high. You've both noted that the new property tax to fund education is high. So be specific. If you are eliminating that, be specific about what other funding mechanisms you would have. You've mentioned loopholes. Name some loopholes you want to close.
So one of the things that I've mentioned before is, so when this property tax was imposed, it was definitely done in the middle of the night with no opportunity for the public to provide any feedback or anyone to really even pay attention to the details. There were corporations that actually got a tax break and they didn't even ask for it. They were just given a handout. We had some oil companies that are simply transporting their goods from North Dakota to our coast and selling them overseas that are getting a tax benefit. Those are the kinds of things I'm talking about closing. We need to make sure we are encouraging our economy, encouraging good corporations so that there's a benefit to the public. But when there's a benefit without a corresponding benefit to the community, that is a problem. So yes, let's have accountability, let's have transparency. Let's make sure that when we're passing bills, we're doing it in the light of day, where there is discourse, where people have the ability to provide input. And that is what a vote for me does. It creates accountability and transparency.
Ms. Englund, you said that you would have voted against that tax plan, if we understand the reports correctly. So what funding mechanism would you have voted for?
So to say that we need to vote for more funding mechanisms is the false assumption that our tax revenue is not growing. But the truth is our economy is booming, hence why we're having the traffic issues that we have, hence why the affordable housing issues. Our tax revenue grew by $3 billion last year, and this is why a vote for me and a Senate Republican majority to create this bipartisan caucus and a balance of government means greater accountability. It means that we as a government will exercise fiscal discipline to ensure that not only are we prioritizing our tax dollars, but they're going to actually achieve outcomes. In Washington state, under one-party control, the state failed to fund education, which is what triggered McCleary. Under a balance of power with a Republican Senate majority, they passed a bipartisan agreement. Bipartisan, Democrats voted for this. In order to fully fund education, we've doubled education spending since 2012. So at this point, the question is there enough money? Even A.G. Ferguson said we need to move on. The question is, how is that money spent, and why is that money not being sent to classrooms and teachers?
So we have some great questions here, but I want to just, if you're thinking of a question and you're concerned it won't get considered, please pass it down the row so the folks can gather them as we go forward. Okay, so to start with you, Ms. Dhingra. State Senator John Braun, you may have heard, wants to write down the cost of the property tax increase that you're discussing using the windfall, the $500 million extra that came in a sort of a cheery revenue forecast that just happened recently. Are cheery economic forecasts a good way to fund things that have to be paid for year after year, so have to be sustainable? Is that the right way to fund something that matters to us, that's ongoing?
You know, we really need tax reform in this state. We really need to make sure we have methods of collecting revenue that are sustainable and that are predictable. And right now, we're in a spot where we really have to grapple with what we're trying to do and how we're trying to do it. And really, it's really, if we need to have a really hard conversation on, you know, how are we taxing ourselves and what are we doing with that money, we really have to make sure we are looking at everything that's available. And a lot of the sales tax, a lot of the property taxes, they're just so volatile that there really isn't a good mechanism of ensuring that there is some predictability there. And I think I've lost track of the original question.
Well, it had to do with using these economic forecasts that come in and sort of give everybody the confidence that,
Right.
hey, we can spend on this because we had extra money coming into the state. But as you know, as we've all experienced, sometimes those forecasts come in the other way.
Right. And I think that is exactly what goes back to sustainability and predictability. And frankly, what's going on at the federal level, we may be needing a lot of that extra money to make sure we're protecting women's health, because we may lose health care. We have to make sure that we're using this extra money to protect the environment, because guess what? Our environmental protections are going away. So we have these cherry forecasts, but the other question is, what else is coming down the pike that we're going to have to make sure we have money for? And again, a lot of this is just not a sustainable way of funding our state.
So Ms. Englund, the one-time money, is that a good way to fund something like this?
So here's the thing, if you look at our budget, under a balance of power, under a Republican Senate majority, we've actually doubled our rainy day fund. This is what I'm talking about, fiscal discipline, because you know what, life is not predictable. No, life is not predictable, right? Life is dynamic, and so is an economy. And I think a legislature needs to be nimble, it needs to be quick. It needs to also exercise fiscal discipline to understand very clearly what our state's priorities are. Education, transportation, safety, making sure that the most vulnerable among us are protected. And therefore, adjust to the economy. And as a legislature, it is our duty that when times are good, that we are proactively setting money aside for that rainy day, because the rainy day will come. And this only has happened under a balance of power in our state, not one party control. Because if you listen carefully, my opponent and her supporters, they just keep advocating for more money. But more money does not equal outcomes, and it does not equal good outcomes. We need to be smart.
Ms. Englund, I'm going to try to stay on this topic here and offer you an audience question. that was directed toward you. In the budget negotiations that ended this summer, it was your party that insisted on doing the property tax increase in this way. So do you think this property tax only solution is wise? And if elected, how would you change?
So number one, it was a bipartisan agreement. Number two, I've said publicly I would not have voted for it because I do think it disproportionately hits our district. Number three, I think they could have done more as a legislator to find exemptions to sunset on top of the bottled water sales exemption and the extraction of fuels. I agree with Ms. Dhingra there, is we need to be diligent about reviewing exemptions and making sure that they are consistent with the times. Lastly, we talk about educating or funding education in a way that is sustainable, right? And a way that is substantial. Look, capital has feet. If you decide to create a war and divide and create a wall between people who have and people who do not, between employers and employees and labor, then what you're going to have is a society that falls apart. Property tax is stable because property does not have feet. Property stays. Capital has feet. And that's why I oppose a state income tax or capital gains tax to fund education. And in the McCleary agreement,
I'm going to use my challenge card,
Oh.
if that's okay.
Okay.
I think that question gets to the heart of the matter. What does a vote for Ms. Englund get us? It gets us the same as we have been getting for the last 6 years. Gridlock in Olympia, special sessions, 200 days of overtime. We get the status quo. This is our opportunity to actually govern, to make sure that we don't have special sessions, to make sure that we are actually having good debate and discourse, and not have a caucus of no that's holding the entire state hostage. So this is actually a very unique opportunity for every single person in the 45th district to change governance. So let's ask and govern by showing accountability, transparency, and holding our elected officials responsible to do the job they've been sent to do, and not being held hostage.
Are you status quo?
I am not. I'm anything but the status quo Republican, if you look at me. Look, what Ms. Dhingra is advocating for, she says when she says governing, I actually hear control. Because governing entails ensuring a diversity of ideas, ensuring that everyone at the table has an equal voice and can share their ideas and everyone's ideas are considered. Under a balance of power, which has been the last 5 years, we've doubled our rainy day fund. We've increased education funding to be over 50% of our operating budget. We've increased mental health funding by $100 million. And at the end of the day, if we're serious about our government governing, and if we're serious about being different from the extremism we see in Seattle and the extremism that we see at the national level, we will vote for a balance of power.
What do you mean by extremism you see in Seattle?
Yeah.
Take 30 seconds.
Okay. So when I go door to door, I hear a lot of people say, look, keep Seattle's ideas in Seattle, whether it's the idea for the heroin injection site, whether it's the city income tax that they're trying to illegally and unconstitutionally overthrow by circumventing the people's will. These are the ideas. And people on the east side, those are not our values. And we have nothing against Seattle, but those extremist values that circumvent the will of the people, that disregard half of our state, do not represent the east side.
Serious values.
You know, I've lived in Redmond for 21 years, okay? I have worked in this district, and I'm interested in solving the problems of the 45th district. You know, if someone's very concerned about Seattle, maybe they should work at running the mayor's race there. But this is about the 45th district, the issues we're dealing with, and the problems that impact us. And that is education, that is mental health, that is our infrastructure. So let's talk about what's going on here, where we're living.
Ms. Dhingra, the question for you, you've talked about the legislature's solution to funding education. You've said that it's insufficient. You've talked here a little bit about how you would fund it, but can you be more specific about how you would raise the billions of dollars needed to actually pay for the remainder of the McCleary solution?
Well, I think I could be up for a Nobel Peace Prize if I came up with a solution to that in 1 minute. But it starts by just sticking with the problem and making sure we don't lose focus. And I'll say this again, the entire state cannot just be about McCleary. We have to make sure we're also taking care of gun violence, we're taking care of mental health, we're taking care of criminal justice. These all issues
They learn. That's why I am for more options for parents. I am for choice schools. We have 13 in the school district, Lake Washington School District. We have long waiting lists. We need more choice school options because parents love them. Their kids are learning. Their kids want to be in school every day. We need charter school options, and I support charter schools in our state because they disproportionately service families who are 2/3 of the students in our charter schools come from low-income families or they're students of color. What I don't understand is that if we as a state care about education, if we care about our kids and making sure that they love school, are learning and graduating, then why are we not more open-minded to options that in some cases cost less money to run? And so my goal is making sure that if elected, that a Senate Republican majority will ensure accountability and fiscal discipline in our state budget so that schools get the funding that they need.
Well, no debate in this region is complete without an Amazon question. So the day Amazon announced that it was searching for a second headquarters, presumably not here, you posted this on Facebook. The wish list of criteria in selecting a city includes a stable and business-friendly environment. I can't help but think that if there weren't a possible state income tax, increased gas tax, and regulations making it tough for businesses, that Amazon might have decided to keep the entirety of their headquarters here. Can you explain what you meant by that sentiment? And do you believe the 45th, home to Microsoft, clap now, Bluetooth, all these other offices, is a stable and business-friendly environment? Yes.
The late Senator Andy Hill in our district, he proved that we can build a compassionate state government that also lives within its means. He proved, and I hope to carry this leadership style forward, that we need business, labor, and employees to work together. We need to break down walls, and we need to not be combative with the people who are employing and providing opportunities for citizens of Washington State. In the case of Amazon, the city income tax, it's driving businesses out of our state. I mean, when I go doorbelling, I meet with small business owners. So I'm talking mom and pop shops. But I also talk with large business owners saying, look, if there's an income tax, we can move our business or I can no longer be in business. And so my question is, as a state, do we really want to create a hostile environment for the people who are building and moving our economy? Or will the people of the district elect someone like me in order to bring people together around the table and bring solutions for our state?
Ms. Dhingra, do you think Seattle was too glib or confrontational in some way toward Amazon? And what can the 45th district do to show it's business-friendly or more business-friendly?
So we as a state are rated in the top 10 places for business. Forbes magazine, MSNBC, we are a great place to do business. Top 10 in the country. The issue that comes up with big businesses is the city, the state, has to have an infrastructure to help that business. Who was behind making sure we had public transportation options? Microsoft wanted it. A lot of large corporations want it because they understand that if you have big businesses, you need to make sure people have the ability to move in and out. People can live in the area where they want to work, and that we are investing in a workforce. And this is where making sure that you are investing in infrastructure, investing in our education, making sure we have people who can get the wonderful jobs that businesses are creating. That's where all of it comes in. So yes, we have a great business culture in the 45th district.
But quickly, I want to be clear. Do you think Seattle did something wrong? Were they too glib or confrontational in any way that you would say?
I would say that infrastructure is an issue. Have you guys tried going to South Lake Union in the last few years? And I think that is part and parcel of maintaining large corporations. You have to have an infrastructure that supports big businesses. And that is something
So
we
by
have
not
to
doing
work
the
through.
transportation improvements is what you're saying?
Yes, I think affordability is a factor in it, transportation is a factor in it, because if people want to move here to work in these businesses, they have to be able to afford the rent. They have to be able to buy a house. And that is part and parcel of what makes an area business friendly. And that is where we have to step up as a state and make sure we're providing that for the businesses.
Ms. Englund, you have noted that reducing congestion is a priority for you, a desire to change the HOV lane requirements on 405. How would you advocate for these changes, and what other transportation pain points are your top priority?
Yeah. So when I doorbell and I talk to people, I ask people, hey, if I were your state senator, what would you want me to work on? Transportation, traffic comes up again and again and again. And I ask people, what is your pain point? For a lot of people, it's 405. A lot of people feel deceived, not only by Sound Transit, but also WashDOT, because we pay for an increase in gas tax that paid for a lane, and then they stop the toll on it. So the congestion in our area is getting worse and worse. And whenever it comes to HOV lanes, people in my district said, look, I used to carpool with my spouse, but now it requires 3, and I just can't find that third person. And so people are now carpooling even less. I think that in this case, there's mismanagement by Sound Transit, mismanagement by WashDOT, but also the legislature, again, legislated before the market was able to meet that need and criteria. And so when it comes to reducing traffic, I want it to be a bipartisan solution, not only in removing the added car tab tax that people in my district are suffering from who would never use the rail that is being proposed, and making that a bipartisan solution.
So, however, of course, the Sound Transit finances are all interlocked, and Sound Transit is building rail right here to Microsoft. So by removing that additional car tag tax, don't you ultimately damage Sound Transit as a whole, including the system that comes here?
So what we're observing from a Republican majority, a Republican senator, is accountability to Sound Transit. I mean, when Andy Hill was senator, they actually had to fire the Department of Transportation Secretary because of mismanagement. And at the end of the day, transportation solutions should be for reducing congestion. It should be to allow people to spend more time with their families and not in their cars trying to get to and from work. And when people in my district say they want more incremental and immediate solutions like buses and bus routes, the fact that it takes a young mom an hour and 45 minutes to get from Woodinville to downtown Bellevue and has to go through Bothell is ridiculous. We need to improve our bus options. We need to improve our bus routes. We need to expand our parking rights because people want to commute, but they don't have these options.
Ms. Dhingra, let me give you extended time on the same question. What's your top priority for reducing traffic congestion? For making it, not so much even traffic congestion, but for making it easier for people to get around, whether it's on the roads or some other mode of transportation?
So, when we moved into Redmond 21 years ago, it used to take me 6 minutes to get from my house on Education Hill to the freeway. Now I'm lucky if it takes me less than triple the time. So this is not just an issue where you can say, oh, it's 405. It's not. It's the 520, it's the exit on 40th, 51st, Avondale, 132nd on Kirkland, it's Union Hill, it's Novelty Hill. These are interconnected areas. And as I mentioned before, if we want to support our great businesses, we make sure we have options. People in this district, the businesses in this district, voted for SD3. We want light rail. We should have had it 10 years ago. We're here because we did not have elected officials who were thinking long term. You cannot have a knee-jerk reaction. Growth is here, growth is coming, and it's going to continue to come. So let's plan for the future. What do we do when we go to Europe? We get on the trains, we get on the buses. There are no trains here for us to get on. So let's make sure we have light rail coming into our district. Let's make sure our cities, our counties are all collaborating and talking about what does that mean. Because that's going to impact, when light rail comes into Redmond, it's going to impact Duval, it's going to impact Sammamish. So let's make sure we have a regional plan on how we are going to move people, how we're going to make sure that people are not spending time in their cars, that they are able to go and do the things they need to do and enjoy the wonderful area we have in the 45th district. So absolutely making sure that we have a plan for light rail to come in, making sure that it is on time, on budget, and making sure that we have a regional plan which includes our cities and the county, and really making sure we're studying traffic patterns to make sure we are studying chokeholds, and then we're using the data that we have available to make decisions.
And in the last 5 seconds, quickly, what about those car tab taxes? Do you want to see them reduced?
I would like to have a valuation system being fair. I think there is a problem in the way they're currently evaluating it, but the bottom line is that is how we're paying for our transportation. That is what the people voted on. So let's make sure we have a fair valuation system. But yeah, we need that. That's the reality of the situation. You cannot have pipe dreams.
So we almost had the perfect segue there on Sound Transit, when we were talking a moment ago, for Ted from Redmond, who wants to ask this question. Sound Transit is wasting millions of dollars already, and they're just getting started. Should Sound Transit be allowed to continue without strict oversight from the legislature? For you, Ms. Dhingra.
Absolutely, you need oversight. And, you know, I run 2 nonprofits. I have run my own unit at the prosecutor's office. It is all about transparency and accountability. Absolutely. Everyone should be answerable to the people and to the money they have been given to make sure they are producing the results they need to.
What would you say to that, Ms. Englund? If there would be oversight, what would it look like?
Holding agencies accountable is easy to say, but hard to do. And Senate Republicans are currently doing that. If elected, one thing I would do is I would change the leadership structure of Sound Transit so that they are elected and accountable to the people and not appointed and therefore accountable to a political party. Because at the end of the day, we need to ensure that Sound Transit, on the services that are supposed to deliver, come in under budget and on time, and they do not have a record of doing that.
Ms. Dhingra, the battle between you 2 candidates, as everyone in this room knows, is a battle for control of the state Senate. That makes this race a bigger deal, lots riding on it. Everyone gets that. That you will work with your party on many topics. We would love to know what one issue you could see yourself working across the aisle on. Please be specific. We'll start with you, Ms. Dhingra. What issue you would be able to work with Republicans on?
You know, I'm someone who actually attended my first Democratic Party meeting in December. So I am not someone who has a long history of being entrenched with the politics of any one party. The work that I've done for over 2 decades has all been nonpartisan. Running a domestic violence organization, running a mental health agency, and being a prosecutor for King County for 17 years. So I am not someone who has a history of ever doing anything that's party-based. It's very much based on identifying the problem, finding a solution to that problem. It doesn't matter where ideas come from.
What's an issue that you see yourself working with these folks on?
I would love to work on them on gun violence. I would love to work on them on mental health issues. I would love to work on them on dealing with taxes, all of them. There's no one single issue that I would not be open to working on the Republicans with.
You stated that not all Republicans are the same. So what one issue would you be willing to work across the aisle with Democrats on?
I think transportation, traffic is one thing that affects all people across our state. I would love to work with my colleagues in the Democratic Party, in the Senate, and in the House to ensure that, one, we remove the unfair car tab tax that people feel incredibly deceived about. Number 2, I would want to work with them on bipartisan solutions for immediate and incremental solutions to reducing traffic congestion. Our economy is booming, our population keeps growing. We cannot force an entire generation to sit in traffic, literally, for something to be built that may come over budget and not in time. And so I hope that the Democrats in the Senate and the House will be willing to work with me to find solutions to get people moving again. And my work experience has been in the private, public, nonprofit sector. I've worked with people who claim to be, bleeding heart liberals to anarchists. I have the background and experience working with people of diverse ideologies, of diverse social economic backgrounds, and that is the kind of energy and creativity and innovation I want to bring to the legislature.
Infrastructure spending has been part of this debate. When the state does infrastructure building, it comes in a capital budget. It's $8 billion worth, but it has been held up over a dispute over water rights legislation. Senate Republicans refuse to pass the capital budget because they are not getting what they want from Democrats who have offered a compromise that would certainly help people for a couple of years. Do you stand by that Senate Republican decision, Ms. Englund, or should they accept the compromise and allow the capital budget to pass so that infrastructure projects all over the state can be built?
I'm unfamiliar with the details of the compromise that's been presented. I don't know how recently that was presented. But I don't agree that the capital budget should be held as a negotiating chip for, because of this first decision. What I do agree, though, that as a government, our goal should not be about winning. Our goal should be about good, solid public policy that listens to all sides and serves all people. And so I don't know why the Senate Republicans decided that, we're going to use the capital budget as a negotiation chip. Again, I don't support that. I think that was the wrong move. But at the same time, as a people, we need to decide what's more important. Is it that one political party wins, or is it that we reach good, sound public policy?
Is for you, Ms. Dhingra, is that holdup of the capital budget and the $8 billion in infrastructure spending that could go for things like supporting roads and building mental health facilities, is that an issue that you think people should be considering critically when they decide who should have the majority in the Senate?
Absolutely. That goes to the heart of what I have been talking about, is that concept of governing. You literally have a handful of Senate Republicans that are holding the entire state hostage. We don't have a capital budget because of a handful of people. There's bipartisan support in the House. They pass things all the time. And we have to make sure we as a people are saying enough is enough. You're done with your partisan games. It's time to govern. We need a capital budget. It impacts all of us, from education, mental health, vet services. And you cannot hold the state hostage. And that's what they've been doing for the last 5 years, and it has to stop. And this is why this one vote can change the way we govern. Let's pass a capital budget. Let's make sure that we are compromising on the Hearst decision. There was, the Democrats proposed a solution. The Republicans didn't want to do it. Just the handful that are in the Senate. Again, that is what is at stake, and it is about time for all of us to say, we want government that is actually governing.
Well, ask the question that we have to get to. Can each candidate give their opinion on drug injection sites and whether they support them and consider them a good idea? And more specifically, do you have any experience that helps them in formulating their resolution on the subject? And we will start with you, Ms. Dhingra.
Thank you. I do not believe that a safe consumption site is the right thing for the East Side. Okay? I know Seattle wants one, and if they do, then that is something that the people of Seattle need to work with their public health agencies with. We have an opioid crisis. This is not an issue that needs to be politicized. This is an issue that we need to have a lot of thoughtful, well-informed plans around. So here are options. Are we going to incarcerate addicts and use the criminal justice system, or are we trying to figure out a public health alternative? Our jails and prisons are full. So are we going to spend more money in building another jail and prison, or are we going to make more treatment available? For me, it's about early intervention. Today, if someone goes and tells their parent or their case manager or the hospital, I'm ready for treatment, can I please go to a treatment bed? They'll say, come back in 3 months because we don't have one for you. To me, that is the problem. We have to invest in early intervention and options for treatment.
Drug injection sites for the East Side are the wrong solution, not only for the East Side, just because we're majority families and bedroom communities, but also because when we're talking about people who are suffering from addiction, we need to ensure that we have a compassionate response that helps that person overcome addiction, not enable it. A drug injection site only further enables that sort of behavior that is destroying that person's life and everyone else that person knows. As a state, it is our responsibility to make sure that state funds are being used wisely. And that's why in the latest Missouri agreement, there was a $100 million increase in state funding for mental health, for early intervention, to ensure that there are more treatment beds in communities versus large institutions where studies have shown that people will recover better within community and within relationship. I think one example that we should look at is how human trafficking has changed in Washington State under the leadership of then AG Rob McKenna. Instead of, sorry, they raised the flag.
But a very quick follow-up. Would you
Yes.
want to pass a state law outlawing the safe injection sites statewide?
I would be open to that. I would, look, at the end of the day, any legislation should not be solely written by a legislator. It should be written in conjunction with community. It should be written in conjunction with people affected by this illness. It should be written in conjunction with healthcare professionals. It should be written
So would you let Seattle have a safe injection site if Seattle decided it wanted one?
So then you're talking about like city council jurisdiction versus like state, correct?
For example, when it comes to gun safety regulations, many of those are preempted by state law, and Seattle cannot do what it wants, neither can any other city. So should there be a similar preemption for safe injection sites?
I can't speak for the whole state, but I can speak for the people in my district. We do not want heroin injection sites. That is not the right way. And so in our district, we would be against it. We're a part of King County, and I know that King County wants to put one in Seattle and one in our district, and I would be against any of that being put into our district.
You have just a quick response.
Yes, thank you. There are absolutely no plans, zero plans on bringing any of the safe consumption sites to any cities on the east side. You can look it up, there's really no controversy about it. It's not happening. The cities have that ability to ask for one. No one on the east side is asking for it. So it really is a non-issue.
Ms. Englund, let me ask a question from our audience, and this is from Ashley from Redmond. She writes, the Trump administration is rolling back rules ensuring women can access birth control at no cost. What can the state do to protect women's access to contraception?
I think as a state, again, we need to get together with people in business, the ones that are actually paying for these contraceptives, and we need to get together with women rights advocacy groups in order to write a law in our state that does protect women access to contraception. Because here's the thing, I am for a women's right to choose, and I do believe that women should have the right, if they choose, to have contraception, and I have no intention of changing the laws in our state surrounding that. What we are seeing at the national level, and again in Seattle, is when you have one-party control, you're a pendulum that swings from one extreme to the other. And as a state, if we are able to maintain a balance of power, I think we can come up with a more sensible direction for the state on this issue.
And let me clarify, when you say access, do you mean, let me ask, if insurance companies should be required to provide no-cost contraception as they have been today?
So that federal mandate, again, is an example of one-party control. When we have one-party control, we swing from one extreme to another. In Washington State, I believe.
So you would lift that mandate?
Well, I can't lift the federal mandate.
But you would like to see it lifted?
I'm sorry?
You would like to see it lifted?
I would like to see businesses work together with women's rights advocacy groups to ensure that women have access to contraception. And what that looks like may not look like at the, what we're seeing at the federal level is extremes, from one extreme to another, and that puts people in peril. That puts women in peril, and that is not the right way.
Ms. Dhingra, same question for you.
Thank you. I have worked for equity and social justice issues my entire life. And actually, right here, right now, I'm actually going to promise to sponsor a bill that's going to make it illegal for our insurance companies to discriminate against women. Of course, we need to make sure. In fact, there was a bill that was proposed by the House and passed the House talking about making sure our insurance companies cannot discriminate against women. It went to the Republican Senate and died in committee, surprisingly enough. We will make sure that that bill gets passed because women's reproductive rights, women's access to health care is something that should be a no-brainer for every single adult in this room. Absolutely, we have to make sure there's no discrimination.
We're getting to that point where we got a lot of really good questions here. So for both of you, do you support Attorney General Ferguson's lawsuits against the Trump administration?
What I would like to see our Attorney General do is focus on matters of the state. So for example, in the city of Seattle,
Go ahead.
in the city of Seattle, the city council has unconstitutionally and illegally passed a city income tax, and yet the attorney general is not paying attention to what's happening in our own state. And I think that it's important that elected officials actually do the job that they're elected to do instead of potentially positioning themselves for higher office.
Do you support his lawsuits? Just to be clear, when we're talking about, the travel ban, some of the others. Do you support what he's done so far?
So again, I think that the Attorney General is stepping outside his bounds, and in a state where we are having a homelessness epidemic, we're having an opiate crisis, we are still arguing about the funding of schools, and we have major infrastructure transportation problems. For the
So in
state,
your mind, he should not be suing the Trump administration on things like
I think it's an
DACA, travel
issue
ban?
of priorities. At the state level, at the city level, we are spending hundreds of thousands of taxpayer dollars on lawsuits. And yet we continue to have these issues of state, transportation, education, and safety that need that funding more than a lawsuit. Look, I don't agree with President Trump's, all of his policies. I didn't even vote for him in the last election. I wrote in a candidate. And I'm the only candidate here that's willing to stand up, not only to what's happening at the federal level, but also what's happening in Seattle. Because on the east side and in our state, quite frankly, we need a balance of power that is willing to govern and focus on the priorities of our state and not get distracted or obsessed with what's happening nationally.
And same question for you about the lawsuit.
Thank you. I absolutely support our Attorney General. You know, when he guess what Microsoft and Amazon had to do when they had the travel ban? They had to email their people and say, don't travel because we're concerned you may not come back. How do you grow a state? How do you grow an economy? How do you support big business if you are discriminating against the talent that exists here? We had Vancouver saying, hey, big business, come on over. We're only a couple hours away. We don't have a travel ban. So absolutely, I am so proud of our Attorney General for standing up and saying when things are wrong, they are wrong. And that's how you make sure you protect each and every individual in the state of Washington, is because you have to stand up to the big bully. Here we go.
Clapping, and I know I've said it a couple of times, but please refrain till the end, because it's just taking a lot of the time. Manka, a question just for you. Do you support our area being a sanctuary city? If so, how does that protect our citizens?
Thank you. So I will give a little bit more background on this one over here. So I actually got involved in working on hate crimes after 9/11 when the Sikh cab driver was assaulted in Seattle. And so I've done a lot of work with law enforcement around issues of implicit bias, hate crimes, and I'll tell you something that law enforcement will tell you and prosecutors will tell you. We need our law enforcement officers to serve and protect. We want them to make sure that when someone calls 911, they are there to solve the crime, that they are helping victims, that they're making sure that witnesses who want to come forward to hold people accountable feel comfortable doing that. So I absolutely support our law enforcement officers not wearing two hats, not asking about immigration status, but doing the job they're hired to do, and that is to serve and protect all residents of the state of Washington. And I would like all of them to focus on that and making sure they're not asking about immigration status when they're going out to respond to a call.
Let me ask about, let me take us to another audience question, and it's really about climate change. In fact, several members of the audience have asked about it. So what, if anything, would either of you do in the legislature to help Washington reduce greenhouse gases? I think, Ms. Englund, you said that you were not in favor of a carbon tax, but are there alternatives that would help Washington state reduce greenhouse gases?
Yes, and again, this goes back to the not all Republicans are the same. Washington Republicans especially care about the environment. You know, the Republican Governor Dan Evans, who established the Department of Ecology and is a standard for the national standard for the EPA. One way that we reduce carbon emissions is the electrification of the cars on our roads. And I just disagree with my opponent when she wants to impose a carbon tax, because If you impose a carbon tax that doesn't directly affect or reduce carbon emissions, then it's just another tax. And what I am for is working with industry and working with environmentalists to ensure that we are pursuing pragmatic solutions to reducing carbon. And that means, number one, we need to get fuel combustion engines off the road as much as possible. We need, as a state, as a people, we need to make decisions that are more environmentally friendly in our state. And that means, one, maybe providing incentives again for electric cars and electric hybrid vehicles. But also, number two, working hand in hand with industry to ensure that, we continue to be one of the top 3 greenest states in the nation.
Climate change?
Yes, I've actually been fortunate to be endorsed by the Washington Conservation Voters, by the Sierra Club. We have only one planet. And I know my husband works at SpaceX and they want to go to Mars. But the bottom line is, we have this one planet and we have to protect it. The health of our children, our waterways, our air. We all experienced the summer this year. We couldn't go out because of all the ash. We have to make sure we are in a position where we are stepping up and protecting our climate. I would love to see us actually do a lot of investment in green energy, clean technology. And the example I'll give you is the BMW plant that moved to Moses Lake. They moved there to take advantage of the clean energy out there so that they can market the BMW as a green car. Let's encourage that. We are a state that has so much talent, has so much to offer. Let's make sure we are thriving, that we are bringing in these industries that want to create a greener planet. And making sure, again, we're investing in our children so that they can be leaders of the technologies of the future.
So this is a combination audience and moderator question. Are Donald Trump and national politics at play in this election, Ms. Dhingra? And if so, how? Is this a tea leaf? Should we read it in some big picture way?
Donald Trump is a play because I definitely was motivated to run for office when he got elected. Because I'm so sick and tired of the partisan stuff that's going on nationally. I think it's really important for people to stand up and get involved, people who actually have the experience and have done the hard work on the issues that our state is dealing with. I think it's important, just as we've seen in this debate, that we need elected officials who are willing to step up and make sure they're protecting the rights of the people of the state. And unfortunately, we have to do that with Donald Trump in the White House. We have to make sure we have an attorney general who is making sure he's fighting the travel ban. We have to make sure we have a Senate that is going to make sure we are funding health care, that we're not going to roll back women's rights, that we have a Senate that is going to protect our environment. So absolutely, we have to make sure that we are set up to be in a position that we can respond to whatever's coming out of the other Washington.
So Ms. Englund, is Donald Trump at play in this election? And you'd mentioned earlier that you disagree with some of the things he does or says. So give us a few specifics along those lines, wrapped into your answer. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, number one, I think last year's election revealed that our nation is deeply divided. And for a lot of people, it was a decision between two not very good options. And that's why I wrote in a candidate, because I felt like, our country is too divided, and we need to elect people who are willing to work across the aisle and, again, bring ideas from all different perspectives instead of making assumptions about people based on their party identity. I think the bigger threat to the people of the East Side, and specifically the 45th, is Seattle and what's happening in Seattle. Because the extremism that we see happening in Seattle politics will affect our state directly. And as a state, if I'm elected, we will do everything to protect people depending on what's happening at the national level. I think in terms of healthcare, I think it's wrong for Republicans in Congress to try to repeal it without a plan. I think in terms of DACA, we need to find bipartisan solutions to not punish kids for the mistakes or their actions of their parents. And in Washington state, at the state level, we have proven that we can do that when we have a balance of power, not one-party government.
So just listening carefully to how you've answered a couple questions, are you running against Seattle? Is Seattle some sort of boogeyman?
So Joni, I think it's really interesting you asked me that question. And if you're going to ask me that question, I think you should ask Ms. Dhingra if she's running against Trump. Yeah. Because she
You're running against Seattle.
So I've never called Seattle a boogeyman because they are a real threat. The policies coming out of Seattle, whether it's heroin injection sites, whether it's the city income tax, right? Or whether it's this rhetoric that, you know, people should be proud that they don't have friends of a different ideological party. I think that is all dangerous and corrosive to our democracy. And that's why Seattle, which is just across the lake, and whose policies, once they pass in Seattle, then perpetrate throughout the entire state, is a much larger threat to the people of Washington.
Are you running against Donald Trump?
No, I'm running because I've had 2 kids in a public school system. I have volunteered in our school system. I won the Golden Acorn Award for work I did in our school. And I know we need to fully fund education. I'm running because I have worked in a mental health system. I run our regional veterans court. And I have to work with DSHS and Western State Hospital. And I know what a mess it is. I've run NAMI East Side for 8 years. I know the mental health system, and I know it needs help. And I know the criminal justice system. And I know we need to do a lot in there. So I'm running to make sure that we are going to take care of our education system, that we are going to take care of the people who are struggling with mental illness, and that we're going to work on criminal justice reform. I'm working to make sure we're governing in the state of Washington.
Let's go to one of the issues that's very important here, and that is housing affordability. And Calvin from Kirkland writes, housing costs are skyrocketing in the 45th Legislative District. How many of the solutions are focusing on affordable housing for the eligible low income? What will you do to help families not eligible for that kind of affordable housing assistance, afford housing here in the 45th? And Ms. Dhingra, why don't you start?
Sure. You know, I kid you not, the first house my husband and I bought on Education Hill, $200,000. It was new construction. Now the sign's going up, start at $1 million. We actually had, just this summer, my daughter's best friend, her father's a firefighter, the mom's a stay-at-home mom, and they sold their house and moved to Lake Stevens because they can't afford to live there anymore. This is a huge problem. And you know how we start to deal with this? We roll back the property tax increase that was imposed by the Republican Senate. That's going to help us in making sure housing is not as hard. We make sure we fund education so that our teachers can actually afford to live in the areas in which they teach. Einstein Elementary School had a new principal every 2 years because that principal had to travel an hour and a half each way to get to work. And so we start working on it in the ways that we can, but it starts by rolling back that property tax increase.
Go ahead.
So rolling back the property tax increase does not address affordable housing or the supply of housing. And that's our problem. In Washington state, in the 1990s, there was a law, the Growth Management Act, that passed that limits growth and limits where we can build as a state. It's 2017. It is time for it to be modernized, to be in line with reality. Our economy has changed. We've gone from an industrial economy to now a digital economy. What that means is that we as a legislature need to modernize old laws and allow for the steady build out of more homes. Because if you can increase the supply, you will decrease the rising costs that are unsustainable, but also you will make affordable housing available to more people. Now in our state, when I talk to the builders in our state, construction owners, one of the problems is over-regulation. Under one-party government, you have over-regulation prohibiting builders from building fast enough to address this housing crisis. And under a balance of power, we will work together with industry to ensure that people can build.
Ms. Englund, you've talked a couple of times about government accountability, the way that Republicans in the Senate have scrutinized the actions of government. Where would you make cuts in the state budget and cuts that don't affect education?
So there's always this false assumption that we have to make cuts. I think the more pragmatic and honest step is, number one, we need to be transparent about how money is being spent in our state. And we do that by increasing transparency and finding a way for people, normal everyday people who have very full and busy lives, to access how a state is making decisions and where the revenue that's coming in and where it's going. One of my ideas to do that is to possibly have an app created so that people in our district, if you care to understand how our budget works, if you care to understand how your money is being spent and whether it's achieving outcomes or literally just kind of going into a black hole, then you can access that. And who knows, that may or may not be possible, but it's something that I'm willing to try. And I think someone being new, first time running for office, and has that experience in bringing people together to achieve outcomes will hope to achieve.
But there's nothing you think should be cut.
So again, a part of that false assumption that something has to be cut is because we don't have enough information on how the money is being spent in our state. When I talk to people at the door, literally, people don't know how education spending in our state. They don't know that over 90% of it is state funding, not federal, right?
Let me stop you here as we run short on time. So Ms. Dhingra, is there anything you cut out of the state budget?
Anything I would cut? I can't think of anything off the top of my head to cut. But I think what we have to make sure, look, I have an app for my campaign. My campaign manager and the staff helped develop it. Doesn't mean everyone knows what's going on. But you know what you can do? You can go online, take a look at our budget, you can take a look at things that are happening in Olympia, and there's accountability and transparency there in terms of documentation that's available. Where we don't have accountability and transparency is when things are run in special sessions behind closed doors. And that's what we need to change. If we want accountability and transparency, let's make sure we're changing the way we're governing. And that's where you start. But I can't think of anything right now that I would say I would cut from our budget.
So we're going to move right along here now to the closing question. It's not a closing statement. And because of the coin toss, Ms. Englund will go first. And this is the question. We used to have a record number of women in our legislature here. I used to write those stories, and we were often trading off for number one position and two with Maine for some reason. But the numbers have been declining lately. In this district, we have 2 women of color running to represent this district. So no matter who wins, there will be a new woman of color in the legislature. But I would like to know, what difference does it make? Do women lawmakers govern differently than men, and if so, how? Missing.
I think we do, and I think this is why. I think women, we don't have as big of an ego. And as women, we traditionally wear many hats in a family. We're the chief financial officer, the chief health officer, the chief operations officer. So we just know in order for life to work, we need to compromise. That even in a marriage, the goal is not to win. It's not to beat your partner, right? But it's to compromise, to listen to the other person's concerns, and to reach an agreement that both can live with. And I think when we have more women in the legislature, we just listen more, and we're more empathetic, and we understand different perspectives better, and therefore we can legislate better. I think as part of that too, I think we need more women representing as part of the Republican Party, and ensuring that balance of power, because history shows us that throughout history, power changes hands. Sometimes the Democrats are in charge, sometimes the Republicans are in charge, and I think as women, we need to ensure that we have women on both sides of the aisle.
Ms. Dhingra, do women govern differently?
I think they do. I think they do govern differently because I think they are more inclined to compromise and work together in solving problems. I think they do tend to be a lot more task-oriented in the sense that if they're given a problem, they want to come and find a solution. Thank you all so much.
Keep going. Please join me in thanking Jody and Essex, thanking our candidates. We hope we've helped inform your vote today. Thanks for coming. Don't forget to vote by November 7th. And have a great day. Thanks to our sponsors, the Boeing Company, Microsoft, and PSE. Thank you.